Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to mourn the passing of one of the most iconic shows to ever pass the Netflix platform. Of course, today we are talking about Glee.
We're going to be mourning the fact that it is leaving Netflix. So, of course, everyone cancel your subscriptions. You no longer need them. 1 minute. I don't want anything during the recording. So we have recorded a YouTube video to go alongside this podcast episode. So head to our YouTube channel if you want to see it. It is us basically getting pissed while watching the first ever episode of Glee. And now we're going to be mourning Glee while talking about its full span and about Glee as an entity, because it is just, I don't even know how you scratch the surface, quite honestly, Skye. I really don't.
Well, I guess maybe just reminiscing on our first introductions into Glee, because I feel like they were slightly different for each of us. So I don't know what yours was.
So mine pretty much was just when it came out. Like I saw all the adverts on E4 as it was going. I saw I wouldn't say I saw it from day one. I think my sister might have. I definitely saw it from like week 3 or 4. But I mentioned in our YouTube video that I basically got super into it when the reruns started happening. The show picked up its popularity about halfway through the first season, and I would say that's when I started properly watching Glee as well.
See, it's interesting hearing you say that, because like I did watch it from like when it first aired, but then I stopped for a bit. I say for a bit, actually for quite a few years. So it got, I don't even remember when it got announced, but I just remember that me and my dad watched it together when it first came out, like you said, on E4. And then I think after the first season, it took a really long break. So I never went back to it. It was only a couple of years ago during the first lockdown that, you know, it was on Netflix. It wasn't the first time I had tried to watch it all. Like I had tried again in the past and gotten to maybe the Acafellas episode and just given up again. But there was something about lockdown, unlimited time, a future that was incomprehensible. And I just decided to finally watch it, and I'm really glad that I did for the most part.
It kind of did the same thing that New Girl did, didn't it? It went onto Netflix at like the perfect time. I know, like, I highly doubt Netflix managed to get those shows just in time for the lockdown. Like, it would have been in the planning, in the works already. But the fact that everyone was home and ready to revisit these old shows, like, it was perfect. Especially considering a lot of the people who were like chronically online at the time were people that grew up with these shows, or maybe they were just under that belt, like Gen Z. So they, you know, they finally got to actually watch these shows that they've only ever really heard about or seen referenced. Because I mean, Glee was referenced in everything, like the episode of Community, the Christmas one where they all start joking about regionals. Like that's just one example.
I said to you that like I had seen Community in its entirety before I watched Glee. So then when I finally sat down to actually watch Glee, every time like regionals or nationals was mentioned, I could never take it. Not that I guess it was ever meant to be taken seriously, but I really could not take it seriously because all I could think about was the Community episode. But I think the fact that Netflix had like the licenses to it during the lockdown was probably the best thing it could have ever done, because a lot of people, including myself, whilst we were watching it, forgave so much. So much in it.
I also think when you're like, you know, binge culture, like Netflix binge culture, when you're binge watching something, you don't really stop and question what you're watching so much. So like, of course, at the time, Glee was not the best show on TV, let's be honest. And let's be real, it's aged badly. Like, it's offensive.
Yeah.
The singing and performances are at times questionable. It's auto-tune garble. And the fact that everyone got to go back to it and just binge watch it, they weren't really questioning it. They were just enjoying the nostalgia of it. And so, like, for you, even though you hadn't necessarily seen it all the way through before, it's nostalgia for that time period. And like the pop songs and stuff like that. And like, it just took me back so intensely. Like, I just sat there and I watched like 2 seasons. I was like, what am I doing with myself? But I enjoyed every second.
It still baffles me that you've never seen it from beginning to finish.
No, never.
Like, you haven't experienced season 6. Like, I don't know if it's just me, but season 6 is something else. Like, you think that the entirety of Glee is something that you can't imagine, and then like the last season was almost like hugely their swan song. Like, they knew they weren't getting another season, so they went all out, fourth wall breaking, just no barriers, and it's like a fever dream.
Like American Horror Story. I
Yeah.
kind of have this issue, right, where I can always sense immediately when a show has changed creators, you know, like, well, not creators, but like producers and writers. So like, I always find that I give up on a show post season 2. Maybe it gets better, maybe some people prefer it, but I would say for the most part, prefer the beginning of a show to like anything else. And that was my problem with Glee. It became such a different show. I'm pretty sure we mentioned this before. Brian Murphy and Brad Falchuk, they stayed on, didn't they? But it just became something else. Like they didn't realize what people liked about Glee was it was a bit silly. Like it wasn't ridiculous. That's what it became. Like I think there's a big difference between silly and just stupid, and it became
was really good at like straddling the barrier, and then I think like maybe season 3 onwards it got really ridiculous. I mean, I think a part of that was because when like half of the cast went to go live in New York, I'm pretty sure that was meant to be a separate show, like because I didn't watch it at the time, I can't say for sure, but I'm sure it was meant to be, it was meant to be like the New York years. It was meant to be its own thing. So it felt so weird and different, and so many of the characters got destroyed if they hadn't already been before.
Well, it could have been like a spin-off, and Glee could have carried on as like, you know, one of those graduation kind of shows where you bring in
I think
people.
Intentionally that's what it was meant to be, but I think just because of the way the ratings worked, it just didn't go that way. And then they almost kind of fed into the failure, which in a weird way worked for so long. And then obviously when it didn't, they just decided to cancel the whole thing.
It's just nuts to think that something that catapulted so quickly just kind of fizzled out. It was like a pop and a bang, wasn't it? It was gone.
Yeah.
Like you could not move, and you know, for hearing friggin' what's the song, Don't Stop Leaving, you just couldn't move.
Yeah.
You wouldn't just hear the covers, you'd hear the originals, because the covers would send the originals back into the charts. So, like even if you didn't watch Glee, you knew of Glee. You know?
Well, I was the same. I only watched the first season and then didn't carry on after that until a couple of years ago, but I still knew of it. It was everywhere. References, quotes. It was fucking everywhere for so long.
I think it's like one of those last items of like monolith culture, and I'm pretty sure we mentioned this in a previous White Noise episode, like the concept of monolith culture and like, or monoculture, where just like everyone's seen that same big thing. And I think like, you know, like loads of people go on about Euphoria and Riverdale and like the new Gossip Girl, but it's not like you're crazy if you haven't seen it. I think for like our age group and maybe like a year below and 2 years above upwards, like everyone had seen Glee. And like if you hadn't seen Glee, you knew the major songs from Glee, you knew the major characters, like maybe you didn't know their names or what they did, but you knew their face, because like pop culture magazines, they were plastered all over them and everyone dated. So it wasn't just the show that was popular, it was like the actual actors themselves, like they were in scandals. It was just like crazy. And they did tours and CDs.
Hugely a moment in history. Some of the craziest storylines I've ever heard, like Glee storylines were on par with, I say, soap operas, but like the difference with soap operas is that you expect them to be crazy and out there. Glee was just something else. Like Glee had people believing that you could get pregnant in a hot tub, get away with a fake pregnancy. Like it was insane.
And it was questionable, wasn't it? Like the shit they come out with in some of those episodes is like, it wouldn't fly today, let's put it like that.
Glee's such an interesting show in the sense that people will say that it is one of their favorite shows or it's one of the most iconic shows of all time, which, to be fair, whether you like it or hate it, it is. But every time someone says that, they have to accompany it with a but or I understand why it's problematic, because of course it is. And the difference with Glee compared to so many other shows, like maybe say, I don't know, Heroes, for example, that would have had problematic moments of the time, Glee was different because it seemed to acknowledge its problems, but it did nothing about them.
Exactly. It was like it wanted to acknowledge them, but that didn't absolve them. Like what's the point of acknowledging problems if you're not going to do anything about them? Like try and think of some examples. So the fact they sidelined POC characters, like they are so aware of that throughout the show, but they never do anything about it. Like maybe they get 2 minutes of attention, like Mercedes, but then nothing. like that's
yeah, I mean, like, especially in the beginning, like one of the biggest things was like obviously Rachel always getting solos, but then they never did anything about that.
yeah,
She just got
exactly.
like, I think you told me she got like 46
It was
solos.
46 and there was 100 and I think 12 episodes. So that
Yes.
nearly 1 in 3 episodes she had a solo.
So
Which is
yeah, explain to me
crazy.
how that storyline was ever resolved if
Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
happened.
And the thing
Yeah.
is, like, in hindsight, she wasn't the best. Like, yes, she was the most, like, trained. She was the Broadway star. But if we're talking like stage presence, I would say Naya Rivera, like, God bless.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people had the same sentiment because obviously Glee blowing up kind of went in line with, sadly, Naya Rivera's passing last year.
Yeah,
Which was
scarily
very
so.
bizarre, but it meant there was
Yeah.
such a spotlight. And do you know what blew my mind? I didn't realize how much of an impact Santana made on the LGBT community.
Neither did I, and it's horrible that it took until her passing to realize that and to realize what she fought for on that show, which is such a shame, because as much as obviously I love Santana's character and the story arc that she had, 60% of the time I did not agree with the way her character went about it, which I didn't completely hate, because characters are flawed, and I will admit I do prefer flawed characters over any other because it just shows that they're human. But her, along with a couple of others, was the biggest issue for like bisexual erasure in Glee. It was insane for a show that really wanted to be inclusive. It completely disregarded a whole sexuality.
But I would say that is more on the creators.
Oh, definitely. I don't blame the actress at all. I mean, I know for a fact that she fought for a lot of Santana's storyline. I just think it's such a shame that so much of it is washed away in that, because it wasn't just her character, it was like the whole storyline of Blaine when like him and Rachel had a thing. And I think it would have been so much more interesting if they had just made Blaine bisexual. Why couldn't they? Why couldn't they have done that?
Even if he had questioned for a bit longer, it was only ever really brought up for one section of an episode. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, that could have been really interesting, because the amount of people that, might have known they were gay for a long time, but then at one point in time did question it, like, that would be very validating for people.
Yeah, I think that's just a good example, though, of how Glee had its moments of progression for the time, but it was still very much stuck in like the noughties.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
But it's mad to think how it helped so many people, even if it wasn't necessarily even progressive for its era. Like, let's be real, even at the time it got a lot of flack for some of the stuff it came out with, but it meant a lot to people, because you even said yourself previously, like in other conversations, that people took what they were given. They took crumbs, because what else,
Yeah.
And previous to this, like, people just kind of went with queerbaiting, like Supernatural, and at the same time, whereas Glee was outright with its gay characters. Like, there were actual gay romances on screen, which like you wouldn't see for ages and like other big shows. So in that sense, it was massively ahead of its time, I'd say.
Honestly, you just bringing up like stuff like you said, like Supernatural and queerbaiting in general, just made me realize how like Glee just feels like someone's entire fan fiction. Not to keep bringing it up, because I know a lot of people wouldn't have made it to the season, but for me, season 6 just stands out so much, because it was just, they put everything into there because they knew there wasn't going to be another one. So much of it felt really fan fiction-y, because they knew what the fans wanted, and they were just like, yeah, okay, have it.
Obviously, this episode is going to be spoilery for people, because like we said, we're going to be talking about the whole of Glee. Are you kind of alluding to one scene that I saw posted everywhere last year, when Quinn and Santana got together?
Do you know what? I wasn't, but yes, that is a big part of it. I was thinking of something else, but yeah, that was a huge part of it. I was thinking of the Klaine era. Because the difference with like Santana and Quinn was like, yes, it was very fan service, but maybe, I don't know, on a personal level, obviously I loved it. I thought it was great. Wish they could have gone further, but they didn't. I was thinking more of the fact that Kurt and Blaine's storyline literally became a fan fiction, because like I said, you've never seen it, but there was like a whole section of them getting trapped in an elevator, Saw style, and
in the Sue voice, wasn't it?
For the sake of Sue's entertainment. And I was like, am I on drugs? This is happening. Like, I swear, I was totally sober during the time I was watching that, and yet I still can't believe it was wrong. I even rewatched the episode today to make sure I wasn't like misremembering stuff, and I was not. It was just full fan service.
Understand is like, how do so many shows get so stupid as they progress? Because you would think they'd realize that will turn people away. Because like, look at Riverdale. Like, that's a perfect example. Or Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Like, it turns people off. So I don't get how so many shows like Glee went down that route and rabbit hole.
I think with Glee, it was more to do with the fact that they did take a bit of a risk doing that. Whereas nowadays, production studios know that people love to hate watch stuff.
That's true.
You know, YouTube commentaries are hugely more popular and things like that. Whereas back then, I just feel like with Glee, they were like, you know what, this is it. We're going to go out on a bang, whether it's a good one or a bad one.
Mm-hmm. I guess, yeah, that's fair. But then there's ways to do that without going crazy. Like, just in the beginning, like silly little things. Like, you know, when Rachel and Puck got together, like, that wasn't out of the realm of reason, but people thought that was insane. I remember everyone talking about that. Like, didn't have to get like out of the realm of reality.
But then you could argue that like Glee set the standard for that, like, because I'm not saying it was like a hugely monumental thing that they did, but because they had already done it, so many high school shows after that, like Riverdale and like Sabrina and things like that, had to kind of live up to the hype, especially during lockdown. Like, I think lockdown changed so much about that culture, because before then, with things like Riverdale, you were probably dealing with a completely different generation. Like, you would have the overflow, but people forget how old Glee actually is. But once Glee got added to Netflix, and then you had so many people rewatching it, Riverdale and all that had to kind of step up their game, because they were like, okay, this is what people are watching.
Has been mental for a while. You know, like, some of those clips are fucking horrifying, and they're from like 2017.
Yeah, true.
Like, won't go too deep into it, but the bloody joining a gang, the strip club thing, I've only seen
I didn't even get that far in Riverdale
feed, and I was like, what is going on? But I don't know, I'm not a fan personally. Like, I don't know where those viewers are coming from at that point, because
you know
like,
what, it's so
watched the final seasons on Netflix. Like, do you think you would have watched them? Would you have waited week to week?
No.
Exactly.
No. Streaming culture is a huge part of that. But do you know, just hearing you say that about Riverdale makes me wonder why. Because I think I watched the first season of Riverdale, and then I couldn't really do it anymore for me personally.
I think that was a lot of people. Yeah, I reckon their viewership went.
But I can't understand why I couldn't do it with Riverdale, but I could do it with Glee, and I have done it with Glee at least twice in its entirety.
Waiting week to week. There's that aspect.
Yeah, but for me, it wasn't even that. I don't know why. I don't know if it's because of the year it came out, or the fact that it was a musical, like musically inspired, was a huge thing for me. And obviously it would have just been for the LGBT community in general, not to generalize, but personally musicals mean a lot to me, and they're always what I get drawn into. So it's just so strange that it is weird that Glee has this weird magnetism that I don't think we can fully pin down.
Part of it is that even when it got wild, the characters were already super fleshed out and lovable. So it wasn't like they introduced you to people and were like, bear with, and then went nuts. You know, like, you had time to ease into the wildness. Like, yes, there is a crazy jump, but like, you don't go from one episode at the end of season 1 to the first episode of season 2 and think this is a different show, which is kind of how like Riverdale felt, and some other teen shows now. Like, the quality change in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is insane to me. But Glee didn't really do that. It was more gradual.
It's interesting you say that, because like, I can't really compare it, because I've never watched the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina like in its like in completion, but with Glee it did kind of feel like that for me. Like, I said to you that if it wasn't for the fact that I knew it had the same directors and creators, I would have argued that maybe they had changed, because it was really simple stuff. Like, we talked about how the a cappella transitions between the scenes, or Sue being a transition between the scenes, was so funny. And I think despite how successful Glee was, maybe it should have only ever been a 3-season max show.
Yeah, I agree. It didn't need to be so long. Like, it could have just, say it started with them as freshmen and then it finished with them graduating. That's perfect. Like,
yeah,
why can't any shows plan? Like, I don't
phase
understand what's wrong
two
with
of
these creators.
phase two of Glee was awful. Like, no disrespect to any of the actors that were in it, but because they never continued, I mean, to be honest, I suppose they did intend to continue it further and then it didn't, but it just felt so disjointed to have these new characters thrown in and then almost abandoned by the end of it, because the show, I mean, it feels like the show got cancelled. Did it, or did it just end?
I have no idea, quite honestly. I don't think
feels
they could
like it
go
got
on because
cancelled.
all of them were sleeping together. All of them hated fucking
Oh
Leah
my God, yeah.
Michelle. You know, like, they couldn't carry on.
Yeah.
Like a Friends situation. Is it Friends or is it? I think it's Friends. A lot of them fell out, didn't they? Like, they've patched up, but towards the end, like, it just happens with long running shows, especially when they were young when they started it.
Yeah.
Like, and that's another topic. They weren't that young. They're like old. It's like a
Yeah.
grief situation. But you know, like, they essentially grow up in the industry together.
Yeah.
Like, they're learning years together, and
I mean, like
they
you
outgrow
said,
each other.
for want of a better word, but the incest of Glee was so uncomfortable, and it really did translate to screen.
Yeah.
Which was insane. Like, even when I was watching it a couple of years ago, and I didn't fully know the extent to which it went to, but you could tell it just got so uncomfortable. Like, I still can't get over the fact that you didn't know that Leah Michelle and Matthew Morrison had actually dated. But doesn't it make so much sense?
For listeners who don't necessarily know the cast, that is Rachel and Mr. Shu. So that's like vile. It just comes through, doesn't it? And it makes some scenes in the show feel more inappropriate with context. And I don't care what anyone says, you cannot watch media without context. Like, fair enough, you don't know it already, but once you learn some context, you don't unlearn it. Like, you'll never see something the same way again. Like, I'll never now watch the episode where she has a crush on Mr. Shu and saying,
this is what I mean. Like, if that was going on in reality, why did they then decide to write that?
I know, it's so bizarre. I don't know if you've ever listened to it, but Kevin and Jenna from the cast, who play Artie and Tina, they have a show, like a podcast, and they've gone into loads of stuff, like, not necessarily naming names, but they do dance on topics, and I
haven't heard that,
amazing.
But I've seen interviews with the separate actors respectively, and
I love how open they are about it.
Yeah, it feels like a very Twilight Robert Pattinson moment.
Yeah, definitely.
To pick out the issues with it. But again, in a similar way, for some reason, 2009 to like maybe 2015, which, thinking about it now, is, I'm sure, was pretty much the runtime of the show.
Yeah, pretty much.
It just felt like a wormhole.
Yeah, pretty much.
You know, maybe that's just us in our generation, but it really did.
It's like so much changed in that time, which I don't think a lot of people appreciate. Like, now we look back on Glee and we're like, holy fuck. But at the time, everyone was just so absorbed in like just the gigantic scale of it, like outside.
See, I wonder what would have happened if maybe Glee came out in like 2006 and had a bit longer before that era hit, because I think Glee hit a time where stuff started changing, people started to become a lot more alert to things, and then Glee didn't really change with the times. It just stuck to its
kind of
guns,
did a similar thing to, say, How I Met Your Mother. That came out in 2005 or 6, so it's like, you know, mid to late noughts, and it's okay for the year it came out, but within a few years of being out, things are changing, and How I Met Your Mother did not change. Like, you look back on that now, it is unbearable, genuinely unbearable. And it kind of was by like season 4, and same with Glee, even by season 2, like, oh, should they be saying that? You know? At the time. But there's questionable jokes in that show where you think, I don't think this would work today. It's mad how something that was so progressive at the time now is like, fuck. You know, it just blows my mind. And what is even crazier to me is to see a show that was considered a savior and so progressive had a lot of controversy around it. So this is talking about, say, the offensive content, but not just that, the sexualized teens. And this goes into Leah Michelle dating, I forget his name, Matthew Morrison. Like, they didn't really think about it.
It still hasn't stopped.
No.
i.e. Riverdale. I mean, just, you know, going into it now, like, it does sound like we're really like being really negative about the show, whereas, you know, I think just off the bat, we wanted to get a lot of the problematic stuff out of the way, because we are fully aware of the issues that it had, the fact that it could not be made today. But then in the same way, it's like, if they were to make it today, I would just say no, because it wouldn't work in the same way.
I agree.
It wouldn't have the same impact. And I think, like Lyanna said, one of the biggest things about Glee of the era it came out is that it was the breadcrumbs for a lot of different communities, but especially the LGBT community. There was like such little representation in mainstream media that Glee was one of the only shows that was doing it. People needed that, you know, kids needed that. Whether it was good or bad, they needed to see that kind of representation. And whilst Glee may have not always gotten it right, every so often it hit a mark that really resonated with people. And I think, as dramatic as that might sound, you know, and you might think I'm ridiculous because I'm talking about Glee, but it meant a lot to people. It's like, you know, it's like you said,
I think it's fascinating that, you know, a show that today would be deemed like absolute trash and terrible, maybe even just like subjugated trash like Riverdale, it was massive. Like, it was huge. Like, I cannot even stress how huge Glee was. I genuinely don't think people understand. Like, Gen Z do not get it. Like, Gen Z like see Glee as a silly little thing that was on TV and really big, and it's like, no, it was everywhere. Like, and it meant a lot to so many people.
And it was everywhere during a time where, like, you know, TikTok didn't exist.
Exactly.
Social media, in that kind of respect, wasn't really a thing. People who were on YouTube were laughed at. You know, like, it's gonna sound cliche, but everybody was a Gleek, whether they watched it or not, because everybody fit into that kind of outsiders, misfits stereotype. And I think that was the biggest thing, because I can't think of another show that was out around the same time that would have related to so many people.
No,
like,
I don't think so.
The storylines were out there. Half the time, most people wouldn't have experienced
people
them.
were really latching on to the real life drama that they got from it too, because like I say, like, the rumors, like, just to go into it for people who, like, you know, the uninitiated, there were so many rumors about Lea Michele and Diana Agron, who plays Quinn Fabray. I literally forget, what is it, Fabry or something, I can't remember. But there was like a ship between their characters and a ship between the actresses in real life. So for the LGBT community, that was like hitting a fucking gold mine.
Whereas now, in like, and this isn't a drag, but like, you get that all the time. Characters look at each other for 5 seconds longer than they should, and you get that. But that wasn't a thing back then.
And also, like I was saying, in real life, people latched onto it, because when they did a world tour, they wore t-shirts, didn't they, from one of the episodes, which like says their you know, things they're concerned about. And I don't know if you know about this, Diana Agron went on stage one night wearing one that says "I like girls," and so people freaked out, because they're like, wait a minute, is this real? Because obviously it had such a big LGBT community. Is she just supporting, or is this a personal statement? But the thing is, right, already these rumors are going around with her and Lea Michele. So her and Lea Michele were very friendly on stage all the time. Then they stopped being. So people who thought they were together, like, have they fallen out? Have they broken up? Then one night she comes out with this "I like girls" t-shirt on. And from that night on, they weren't funny with each other anymore. They were back to being super cuddly and stuff on stage. So this gets everyone. Can you imagine if that happened today with TikTok?
You know what? There is a part of me that hearing shit like this makes me wish I had been a Gleek at the time, because little closeted me would have ate that shit up. I mean, so I understand why it meant so much.
Insane, aren't they? Like, they're on par with like the Taylor Swift fan and things. And to be honest, there's the intersection, because everyone thinks she dated Diana Agron. So, you know, it's not just about Glee, it's, you get this intersection with other big pop culture moments of the time, the pop songs that they brought on stage, and they had all these people on the show, like gay icons, like Britney Spears, the Madonna episode, like, people don't realize
Adam Lambert.
It was insane. Oh, it's so good.
Hugely.
And it's like, I know it sounds like we're like switching between saying like Glee was a cesspit and Glee was amazing, but like, that is just the experience of watching Glee.
In all honesty, though, I feel like if you're a fan of Glee, this is the turmoil you have. That, like I said to you, you say, "I like Glee," but then you have to accompany it with like, yes, I understand it was this, and that. And I'm not excusing it in the slightest, because it shouldn't have done some of the things that it did. But then at the same time, if it hadn't have done the other things that it did, how would people, especially of our generation, be now?
Yeah, exactly. Like, it will never know. And we just
Yeah.
kind of roll with it, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked a lot about Glee as a thing, as
Mm-hmm.
a show, as a creation. And we're about halfway through this episode. So I think now what we should probably do is dive into some of our favorite moments. This doesn't necessarily have to be positive. This can
Mm-hmm.
also
Mm-hmm.
be ones that kind
I'm
of shocked you.
so glad that you said this because I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So my question is, what do you think was the most inappropriate episode of Glee? But what do you think was the most shocking episode? Because those are two different things, and I have two different
I think
answers.
one of the most inappropriate
Mhm.
was also my favourite. And I think you know what I'm going to say.
Go on.
Rocky Horror. Because why would you want
Interesting.
teenagers performing out on stage?
Mm-hmm. I
But
feel like
I'm
so
also
we were
going
going
to
to
throw
have
out there.
different answers.
Oh, I'm going to throw out another one. They're
Mhm.
kind of tied. The Britney one. When they perform
It's
Toxic.
inappropriate.
Well,
Oh,
why would
yeah,
you perform
true.
Toxic on stage with your teacher?
Yeah, true.
And then there's literally a Britney sex riot. And I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
We've not seen Glee. Literally, the kids are humping the air and screaming like,
Mhm.
"Mr. Shoe, I want you," and shit like that. So, what's your
See,
answer?
well, you see, this is where I think it might feels like I'm going to be like trying to get one over you. I'm not, but this is where I think it will show, say, someone who hasn't watched all the seasons and someone who has. My most inappropriate episode was Shooting Star. And to anyone who obviously has seen the show enough to know, will know it's the school shooter episode.
I can't believe they did that.
Have you ever watched it?
No, you've told me about it and it just sounds horrifying.
Insane. I rewatched it today again just to solidify in my head that it was insane as I thought it was. And like, look, I get what they were trying to do at the time. I really do. And watching it in the moment, there are some really intense and effective scenes, but it was the same way. Well, I felt the same way about it that I did about the school shooting episode in, say, 13 Reasons Why. It was done in a way that I just felt was really inappropriate because, like I said, the whole episode started as any Glee episode would, and then like right in the middle of it, they just decided to have this really intense bit. And I know they did it because they wanted to have that impact, but to me, it just did not work. It felt, and maybe again, it's watching it at the time that I did. Like I said, I only saw this episode a couple of years ago. I didn't even know it existed up until then when I watched it, and I just couldn't get over how then in the next episode they just went back to the same formula that Glee had always had of these, campy show tune kind of situation. And I was like, what the fuck?
You can't do that with making it like a significant moment, can you? Like, it's like, I understand wanting to address a topic, but like, should you? Is your show right for it?
I don't think Glee was the right show to do that on. Like, I get what they were trying to do, and to be fair, pre-Glee, I don't really know what Ryan Murphy and Brad Falchuk's careers were, but I understood why, maybe because this was it's the argument of like, because you have the platform to do it, I guess that's why they decided to choose to do it. But the way that they did it, it just didn't feel right. It felt so jarring and just hugely inappropriate compared to anything else that they did.
There's just like quite a few episodes in Glee where it's like, were they the ones to talk about this? Or like, do you really want to be talking about it the way you are? There's the alcohol episode. What was that? Clearly not on the same scale at all.
But then in a weird way, at least for me with that one, even though they did it in the Glee way, it was a comment that they made that fit the show. Whereas this particular episode, I mean, to be honest, just the title of that episode, Shooting Star, did that feel appropriate to anybody? And I mean, I know because you haven't seen it, there's one particular scene where like Sam is desperate to get out of the choir room because Brittany's just stuck in the toilets on her own, and Mr. Shoe has to like restrain him because he wants to get out, and it's so uncomfortable because you just don't expect that from Glee.
No, it's just I don't know. I think you can do it in shows, but it just can't be a passing moment. That was the problem Glee had. I think it kind of sometimes it put too much on its plate, and it's like it genuinely had no it just didn't acknowledge that ever. It just was like, we'll roll
yeah,
with this.
it's hard because it wanted to cover so many topics, and in a weird way, part of me is glad that it did, because like you say, no other shows were doing it at the time. But then in the same breath, when like you watch it now, it doesn't feel right. But how can you account for stuff years later?
I know.
You know, when like a few shows are now doing it, you weirdly put them on par, like, especially that particular episode. You compare them to the ones that are now, but then I suppose you have to remember that at the time it would have been the only show doing it.
Yeah, that's true. I just think like, just to be able to say like we're one of the few shows doing it, does that mean you do it? You know? I'll try to think of an example. Like the way they went around the teen pregnancy, like it was really great to show like the consequences of teen pregnancy, but then it kind of just brushed it off. Like by season 2 it didn't really seem like a thing anymore. It was like an arc for one season. Like don't get me wrong, they came back to it and like showed the impact it had on Quinn, but it was like kind of like everyone else just forgot about it.
But then it's like this whole idea of they seem to pick storylines and then just cut them off really randomly, because like that storyline specifically, like Quinn fought for a long time to try and get custody of her child. And then Rachel's mum moved to New York with her child, and then she didn't care anymore. And it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, I agree. And they only bring up past things when they want to, like then, or like when Sana says something like, please, you're a mother, like that iconic bit, and she like beats the shit out of Quinn in the hallway. And it's like, this has come from nowhere. Like, no one's talked about her like having a baby for ages, and then suddenly someone's making a dig. I don't know, it didn't make sense to me.
This is why I feel like Glee season 1 to 3 are like really iconic, and then after that they're iconic for maybe the wrong reasons.
I agree.
You know, so much change. There was a huge cast change, which I know happens, but it just didn't fit and it felt weird. And if I had been watching it having to wait for episode week to week, I probably would have stopped.
Yeah, I mean,
honestly,
I remember hearing that they did an episode for Corey Monteith after he passed, and I just couldn't believe it. Like, obviously you have to address it, but at the same time, like how? Like, I don't know if I can watch that.
I have such mixed feelings about that episode, because I knew it happened and I don't agree with the way it was done, but I have no other suggestions to how they could have done it bar cancelling the show right there and then. You know, I say it was difficult, but I don't know how else they could have done it. But it was just so strange, because it's uncomfortable to watch, because obviously I know everybody talks about how the reactions were sincere. The fact that there isn't a storyline, there isn't an end to Finn's character. They never specify it, which I suppose I kind of understand, like as respect for what happened. But it was just, I think, and I mean, I guess there's no denying this, but Glee was unfortunately touched with a lot of tragedy that it had to work through, both during the show, after the show. It's just crazy to think about everything that happened around it. Not just the show itself.
Horrifying, like genuinely, like those. Sometimes it's weird, because it's like, as much as I love Glee, I like sometimes I sit back and actually think about kind of what its legacy has become in a way, and it's like horrifying when you sit and think. Like, I won't even get started on the guy who played Puck, because it's just wild. But I mean, like to have 2 deaths of major cast members, and incredibly young as well. Like they were young.
And it's crazy to think that, like, obviously the actor who played Finn's death happened at the height of Glee, and then the actress who played Santana's death happened at the height of the lockdown
and the resurgence of Glee.
But and it's just mad to think how they coincided. It just, like I said, it doesn't feel real. Even for myself, as someone who wasn't a part of like the Glee train when it happened, it was mad that then that situation happened whilst I was like at the height of my own personal Glee journey. It was just crazy.
It's mad. Like I remember, like I wasn't even watching Glee anymore when Corey Monteith passed away, and I was like heartbroken. Like the world, it was like genuinely. Do you remember? It was like the world stopped. Like I think that for me was the moment I realized how big it was. I really do, because I did not think so many people were going to mourn him. Like, obviously he was a star, but exactly, that's what I mean. Like you didn't even watch it and you know about it, and I think a lot of people know he passed away, you know, whereas for a lot of shows people wouldn't know if one of the cast did. was so sad. And to be quite honest, he's one of the best bits of the show. Like, I know he kind of gets ignored later on because, let's be real, a lot of the girls have a bit more like star power about them.
Yeah.
But in the early show, he really brought like the warmth, you know, in like, the first episode, he's kind of what brings the Glee Club together, really, isn't he? He picks the music, as he says. Like, he gives them their like 80s song leaning and stuff. Like, the show is the show with Finn.
It's also so chilling to think about how, and I have to assume you didn't see this because I've said I don't know how many seasons you watched, but how like the last episode that he's in is when he's talking to Rachel about how they'll like meet up again.
And
then that's it. And it's just, I mean, I guess any last scene he was in would be chilling, but it's just really strange how the time coincided with it.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
I just find it so sad to think like they were mid filming and they went back to filming. Like, that's awful, isn't it? But I don't know, we've gone into a really sad part of this. I do think,
but then to be fair, I don't know how you can talk about Glee without talking about the tragedy that surrounds it. I
completely agree. I think though we do need to leave on some positive notes, not to 180 completely, but some favourite moments from Glee, not just the sad bits and the controversial bits. What would you say, you know, like your favourite? Well, you can say multiple favourites here. There's favourite characters, favourite episodes, favourite songs. That's the greatness of Glee, isn't it?
I mean, okay, so for me, my favourite character would be Blaine. I can't help it. I'm sure he's like a fan favourite, so that probably is not to be expected, but I really liked him as a character, and it upset me so much when they decided to make him cheat on Kurt, because in my opinion, Kurt never deserved him. I do not like Kurt as a character. I can't help it. I just don't. It just didn't make any sense, the whole cheating storyline as well. But I really liked him. I quite like Darren Criss as an actor anyway, so that might be why. So I really liked him. So one of my favorite moments is probably the teenage dream scene where he gets introduced. It's insane. It's so good.
Iconic. What favorite episode?
I suppose overall it's going to have to be the Rocky Horror episode, because that led to a whole other part of my life, which if people don't know about, then please go watch our Rocky Horror episode. But it just led to a whole other rabbit hole that I fell into. So I guess it would have to be that one.
Cute. So for myself, I would say my favorite character is probably Santana, because mean lesbian, best thing ever. And well, that's hard as well, because I also just genuinely, I love Jesse. I know he's barely in the show, but I loved him because I liked having a character that was like unapologetically ambitious. You know what I mean? Like, Rachel always acted like a good person, but Jesse was kind of like an asshole. You know, Jesse was just an asshole. And then maybe also, it's hard. I like the mean ones, really, because they're what make Glee. Like, not everyone was nice. There were mean people, weren't there? And favorite song, that I can't do that. It's too hard.
Do you know what? Not necessarily favorite song, but like favorite scene for me, because it was just so fucking iconic, and I can't imagine any of the show doing it, was the Bohemian Rhapsody and Quinn giving birth.
Amazing.
Insane. I cannot imagine another show doing it successfully. It was fantastic.
I do think like Don't Rain on My Parade was really good. Like, that's iconic. I'm trying to think of other really good ones. Oh, I really like when Jessie did Total Eclipse of the Heart. Just because I love Jessie. That was amazing. Anytime they do like super 80s inspired ones, like, they just nailed it. I think they had like the perfect vocal cast for those songs. And also anytime Santana or Mercedes got to have a bit of a moment, like when they did that song together, I can't remember which one it was. That was amazing. That's a fan favorite.
To be honest, I feel like any time anybody other than Rachel had a solo moment was just better. One of my favorite moments was you know, when Mike Chan was in it, and because obviously his whole thing was that he couldn't sing but he could dance, and like when him and Tina do their duet, and I think that's so fucking cute. That's probably one of my favorite moments outside of Blaine. Not that my whole Glee experience was based on Blaine, but the more I think about it, maybe it was.
What about early in the show, because there's some iconic ones early that everyone forgets about. Like, I really like when what is her name? The teacher brings it, April, when she does Maybe This Time. Like, she kills that.
Every time April Rhodes was in the fucking show was just insane,
Amazing.
both good and bad. When she taught them how to like get away with drinking at school, and then there was like the alcohol episode.
Like, that is such an inappropriate episode, but it's so good because of how inappropriate it is.
Yeah.
So good.
But it's so like weird to think about how, you know, back then I would say people of our age didn't really know who a lot of the guest stars were, which was so weird. And like watching it now,
so like the smaller ones, so like
yeah. That's what I mean. Like it was so like I know why a lot of them were in it, because obviously they had like either a Broadway background or a musical background or whatever. But it was just so interesting how like it just made me realize that so much of Glee was like, I'm just gonna have to imagine like Ryan Murphy just like, being like, yeah, I want this.
I think it was just like a love letter to the stage, really. Like the fact they got both leads from Wicked is just mental. Like, I think that's probably one of the most impressive parts.
Yeah, not even in like fleeting cameos either.
Yeah, exactly. That's what just I mean. Like Britney popped up, but
do you know what I was just gonna say?
With characters.
Yeah. Other than Britney, I can't think of any other character that was just a cameo. I feel like everybody else was like had a storyline and a plot point in Glee.
I guess, you know, because
Demi Lovato, Adam Lambert.
Amazing. I can't believe they got all these gay icons. Like, it was nuts when you think about it. The guy from what's his name? Neil Patrick Harris. He was in it briefly. I don't remember those episodes. I just remember him briefly being in it. He was like a really good performer from when Will was. I was
gonna say he was Will's rival, and
I think he was in one
episode. Hated every second of it.
So funny.
Not because I have anything against Neil Patrick Harris, just because I fucking hate Will Schuester.
Jeff Goldblum popped up for like one episode as Rachel's dad.
Yeah, which
and
was
that wasn't
so weird.
Explained at all.
Not even slightly, because like in the first episode, that is not the guy that's in the pictures she's talking about.
So good though, worth it.
Yeah,
like, break the continuity. But if I could have Jeff Goldblum on my show, I would also break the continuity in canon.
Yeah, fair enough.
So would. I don't even remember other big cameos. Like, they're kind of the ones. I know there were huge ones, but they just out because
we're definitely missing really fucking bad. Whoopi Goldberg was in it. She was like the talent scout for NYADA. So I think I'm starting to guess where you stopped watching it, but like from like season 4 onwards, with like the whole New York episodes, Rachel and Kurt both went to New York. They were like living together, and they were both going to NYADA, which was the school that they went to, and it was like the Glee equivalent of their lives at that time. And Whoopi Goldberg was the talent scout who came to find them. Mad. Some of the other people who guest starred, like, you understood and you made sense because they were singers or Broadway actors. Whoopi Goldberg, why was she in it? Did she want to be?
No
was
reason.
She under contract?
I guess
she just
was so big that like everyone just wanted to jump on
it really
shit,
was.
Right?
I mean, surely at one point it had to be the biggest fucking show on television.
Yeah.
Because
actually,
also
one we're not thinking of is fucking Josh Groban. He literally starred as himself in like season 1.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
True. I'm just thinking about the fact that like I think when it comes to Glee, people need to remember that Glee got big before streaming services were a fucking thing. It got big when it was just, you know, in the UK was on E4, which was a channel that people just watched when they couldn't find anything else to watch.
It wasn't even a main channel.
It wasn't. It was the offcut of channels. It was like the BBC 3 for the Channel 4 production series.
And it was kind of the perfect channel for it to be on because they always did reruns, you know, so like it kind of made sense that it found a home there.
I mean, I can't lie, now that we're starting to wind down, I'm genuinely really sad Glee's being taken off Netflix, and I think Netflix are gonna fucking regret that in the long run.
To blast through it, genuinely, even if it's just for the first 3 seasons, because I never really properly watched season 4, but the dude from the Flash is in it, isn't he? And I've
Yeah.
seen those clips of him performing with Santana, and that is amazing. Like, I can't remember the song, but
Honestly, for you and just anyone, I would just say that whilst it's, well, actually, by the time this episode comes out, you'll have a day left. But whilst it is still on Netflix, even if you don't want to, just watch it because it's there. Because it was really a really specific moment in time. And I feel like everyone needs to experience it, good and bad.
Maybe I'll do it.
You need
just
to.
for spotting cameos and like random stuff I wouldn't have originally. Because like, I don't know, I just keep randomly like thinking of ones, you know?
There's random storylines. There's also the fact that because it went on for so long, everybody slept with everybody, both in and out of the show.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things, how like all the characters have been with each other. Do they ever bring that up, like towards the end of the show?
What, the characters sleeping together? I don't think so. Maybe a couple of times.
Today,
like
that would be a joke, wouldn't it? Like
one of the biggest ones that I think they bring up, and this is just because for some reason Sue has a huge obsession with them later on, is how. So you remember how like Kurt gets bullied by that guy quite a lot during like the first, second episodes? Well, after Kurt and Blaine break up, Blaine ends up in a serious relationship with this guy. Like how you could date the bully of effectively the love of your life is insane. But they move in together.
So it's not even a 3-episode thing. It's
like a thing. It's a part of the reason for a long time why they're not together. That's the only one I can think of that like they kind of address it, but nobody ever gets addressed. Really, it's like something happens and then they move on and pretend it never happened.
It's just making me want to watch more and more, you know, like it's a shame that it's getting taken off right around when people are like really appreciating it, but at least everyone got like a year and a half of it, you know?
I doubt we've seen the last of it. I really don't. It will be back, or some other streaming service will pick it up because Netflix, you're crazy for getting rid of it.
Like I don't even know who aired it, because like maybe Disney Plus, but I don't think it was Fox, was it? It was like some other random, who knows? But if it was Fox, clearly Disney are taking it. But I don't know, I just think that if it's not going to be streaming anywhere major, like on any major streaming service, like someone needs to fill that void. Like there needs to be a sincere silly show again. Like clearly the demand's there, because all we have now is fucking Riverdale and that's kind of it, because there's nothing really that's like funny and sincere anymore. The only thing I can really think of is something like, say, like Bob's Burgers.
I completely agree. Like, as much as I'm not a huge fan of Riverdale, it is probably the Glee of this generation.
But then I wouldn't say it is, because it's not trying to like do anything.
Yeah, but the only reason that I would say that is because I feel like if Glee was going to be made now, it would be Riverdale. And Glee is just another example of stuff that couldn't exist now.
Well, I mean, like, as much as there were inappropriate moments in Glee, it still did keep its audience in mind. And now teen shows, like, they're not made for teenagers. Like, I genuinely can't think of any shows which are like for teenagers anymore. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think we even said that in like when we were watching the first episode, that as much as 100% the actors that were playing the characters were not teenagers, they still were having really teenagery problems, whereas Riverdale is not relatable in the slightest.
And when you think
who is having those troubles,
the stuff that's going on in Euphoria, like drug addiction and cam work, like I mean, yes, of course there are people that go through it, but should you really be, it's that argument, should you be shoving it? Like, you know, it's this whole thing, whereas like with Glee, it kind of, in the first 2 seasons, it did
covered all bases.
It covered like basic things, you know, like staying safe and bullying and body dysmorphia and all that kind of homophobia, everything really. But you know, it'd be nice to see a show like that again for teenagers, because I appreciated it. I think they should have something they can turn to that isn't Disney Channel or HBO. You know, like they need a good middle ground.
I said there is no middle ground right now.
Yeah.
And Glee disappearing, unfortunately, is removing that middle ground for anyone wanting to discover it now.
Exactly. Because I think even now it'd be beneficial to some people. Like, it'd be very questionable in some aspects, but someone's going to get something from it.
As dramatic as I'm sure you can tell from people watching on YouTube as we are being, it really is an end of an era of Glee just being removed, because as problematic as it is, it meant so fucking much to people back then and now.
I don't know, it's such a shame. Like, I mean, there is the whole argument, should people in their 20s be watching shows for teens? That's another topic. But if there was another show kind of like Glee to come out today, I would eat it up. And I don't care.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be nice to see what that would look like today. Like, I don't think it's out of the realm of reason for there to be a reboot. It'd be hard because it is so of that era. It would kind of be like the Gossip Girl reboot, where it's like some people love it, some people can't get past that. But like, it is fun to see a concept like brought today. I think it would be interesting.
The only reason I think a Glee reboot wouldn't work is because it was almost like they tried to do that during the time of like the second phase of Glee, and it would just be like that. And
true.
Personally, I would maybe watch the first episode out of curiosity, but it wouldn't
again
work.
I've been loving the new Gossip Girl. Like, it's a different beast, and it isn't necessarily a good show. Not really, but I have been loving seeing that concept a few years later and how much things change in those few years. Like, it's amazing. I can't even imagine. Because think about Glee now, like people getting famous overnight. Imagine the rivalries that would stoke in a high school and in a Glee club. Like, imagine a Rachel Berry who's TikTok famous.
Well, this is what I mean. I feel like, and this is where I feel like maybe we'll start to split paths on opinions, but I think personally for me it wouldn't work because just using that as an example, a Rachel Berry on TikTok. Yeah, Rachel was annoying when Glee happened, but she was annoying in a way that fans still wanted to see. Nowadays, real life Rachel Berries exist, and people don't even want to watch that. But so
they did when Glee was around. You know, there were theatre kids then, and there are theatre kids now.
There were, but they were not as mainstream as they are now. You had to dig to find theatre kids on social media back then.
Show where it showed people doing like Bridgerton the musical on TikTok. Like, that's mad.
Thank you.
I think it's, I don't know. I think it's something I'd like to see. I doubt it will happen, but it would be interesting. We'll find out.
I mean, it's just sad because I know for a fact that obviously, apart from maybe us, Glee leaving Netflix is going to pass without anybody probably even caring that much. But I feel like people are going to care maybe slightly more than they admit.
Yeah.
Because especially during the pandemic and lockdowns, it's been a real saving grace for a lot of people.
I think so. Yeah, it's been something fun to watch and revisit. With things like constantly coming on and off streaming services, it will definitely be a bit of a gap. Just one more reason to doubt whether you should keep your Netflix subscription, quite honestly.
True.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a kind of another nail in the coffin for me. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, you're completely right. Yeah, good luck, Netflix now.
No, you've removed Glee.
You have removed Glee. No one cares.
But on that note, that's kind of what we have to say for today. I mean, we've barely scratched the surface. I could be talking about this for a week. We could literally do 3 hours talking about highlight moments, but that'd get boring. You could just watch the show, really. So go watch the show if you haven't already and you have the means. I'm not saying find it online, but I'm not saying it. Give it a watch. Maybe watch some highlights on YouTube. And hope you enjoyed this. We want to hear your highlights as well, quite honestly. So let us know on Twitter, in the comments, anywhere. So that's the end of the episode. Never know how to end these still after all this time. So
this is now the awkward ending.
So bye, guys.